Yeah, Benjamin and y'all called me this morning.
Stoking the fire. Hey everyone, as you all know, I enjoy debunking charlatans more than just about anything else, and today we have a 2-for-1. We will be looking at Brett and Eric Weinstein, the self-appointed leaders of the intellectual dark web. I've never debunked brothers before, so let's have some fun with it. Again, in case you've never heard the term before, these guys are prominent members of the so-called intellectual dark web, the term actually having been coined by Eric himself.
The group of people I'm increasingly hanging out with is the intellectual dark web, which is emerging.
The dark web, of course, being the place where people hire hitmen and watch kiddie porn, so it's not really the most sparkling connotation. But the deeper down the rabbit hole you go with these two, the seedier and more repulsive they seem, so it is quite fitting. Now, if you've seen some of my recent debunks on Terrence Howard, you've heard me talk about Eric a bit already. Well, there's a lot more to discuss here today, including a special guest to help me debunk his theory of geometric unity. But let's start with younger brother Brett, and then pivot to big boy Eric after that. Brett has a doctorate in evolutionary biology and taught at Evergreen State College for 15 years. He was catapulted to prominence in 2017 due to an incident on campus. Here's the popular version of the story. A protest had been held every year called Day of Absence, where minority students and faculty stayed off campus to make a statement about racial issues. In 2017, it was requested that white students and faculty leave campus instead for that year's Day of Absence. Brett vocally protested this idea, saying that you can't force people off campus just for being white. As a result, liberal SJW students threatened Brett with baseball bats, the media erupted with a story about reverse racism, and Brett became a hero overnight by standing up for marginalized white people everywhere. Of course, the reality is totally different. The Day of Absence had always been a voluntary activity where all students could attend workshops and discussions of their choosing, and this year was no different. It was simply that the locations of these discussions had changed, with the off-campus site only able to accommodate 200 people, making it obvious that it was not expected for all white students to attend, nor had all of the minority students participated in the past. None of it had ever been school sanctioned. Nobody was coercing white people off campus or making them feel unwelcome, and nobody threatened Brett with baseball bats. Brett totally exaggerated these events in his own correspondence, distorted the context surrounding those who were protesting a full 6 weeks after the Day of Absence regarding separate campus events, and instead went on Fox News with Tucker Carlson to play the victim in a story that reeks of the exact same vibe as the war on Christmas.
This year, student activists demanded that all white people leave campus or else. Oh my gosh, this is like something out of another country.
Because of the Fox piece, enraged neo-Nazi group Atomwaffen descended onto the campus, repeatedly driving by and shooting guns into the air, sending in bomb threats, and as a result, the school's graduation had to be moved off-site due to safety concerns. Brett sued the school for $3.8 million, settled for $500,000 and his resignation, and promptly began his career as a podcaster and darling of the right.
I'm troubled by what this implies about the current state of the left.
Whoa, you think? Whoa, you think?
Where else have we seen this story before? Yes, Jordan Peterson, frustrated academic taking a stand against PC culture, cartoonishly fabricating the implications of Bill C-16 to manufacture some kind of authoritarianism to rage against, leveraging the blowback and riding the conservative news cycle to launch himself towards a lucrative commentating career, hiding behind a false flag of free speech absolutism. It's all here, beat for beat. Brett, like Jordan, played the reluctant martyr and victim of nasty liberal academia, knowing full well that he was distorting the facts, putting students and faculty in real physical danger, many of whom were targeted with harassment and death threats from white nationalists, and he did it all anyway. He allowed Tucker to state that white people were being forced off campus, which was a lie.
The core demand is that all people of your skin color leave the campus.
He pretended protests were all about a leaked email of his rather than about the treatment of 2 black students by campus police and other social issues, which was a lie, and he kept amplifying these lies on Twitter well after the interview. Thus begins the story of Bret Weinstein, a demagogue from the start, stoking the fires of anti-woke conservative hatred for personal gain with no remorse whatsoever. Now on to the actual science denial, since that's the real focus here. During and shortly following his departure from academia, Bret gained notoriety through a series of appearances on, where the hell else, Joe Rogan's podcast. Having his web presence sufficiently amplified by these appearances enabled him to monetize something of his own. So Bret began dishing out consistently garbage conspiratorial takes about everything under the sun on his own Dark Horse podcast that he hosts with his wife Heather Haying, who also taught biology at Evergreen. Much of their rhetoric capitalizes on a perceived intellectualization of baseless anti-establishment talking points, which we will highlight where relevant. So what are the main topics he needs to be exposed for? Here's what's on the menu for the Bret half of the video. First up, Bret's attempt at revolutionizing all of medical science. According to Bret, and also his brother Eric, Bret had an astounding insight about telomeres that was stolen from him to win a Nobel Prize. To get some context, let's first briefly discuss what telomeres are. Telomeres are sections of DNA that cap every chromosome in almost all animal species. The evolutionary impetus for this is that every time DNA gets replicated prior to cell division, because of the way that replicative enzymes anneal to the template strand, the last few bases can't be read. So the new complementary strand is necessarily a few dozen nucleotides shorter than the template strand. This poses an obvious problem because as incredibly long as chromosomes are, with many millions of base pairs, thousands of cycles of replication and cell division would eventually result in important genetic information being lost, and therefore new cells that can't survive. Evolution stumbled upon a solution in the form of telomeres, which are around 5 to 15,000 base pairs long. The purpose of them is simply to act as long stretches of repetitive non-coding DNA at the ends of each chromosome, so that nothing bad happens as the tips are continually eroded during replication, and an enzyme called telomerase, when expressed, is constantly at work adding more nucleotides to the ends of each strand to keep the telomeres intact as long as possible. If the telomeres are lost completely, further replication can begin to erode actual coding DNA. All kinds of problems occur, and this is called senescence. Okay, so that's what telomeres are. What's Bret's big groundbreaking discovery?
We actually have a kind of concern about pharmaceuticals very generally, and this arises from the fact that in my graduate work, who are longtime fans of the podcast will know, my graduate work, I happened onto what I believe is a flaw in the drug safety system. I published this flaw, and the flaw basically amounts to the mice that are often used for things like drug safety testing and other experiments having been accidentally evolutionarily modified by the breeding protocol that is used to produce them, so that their telomeres, which are these repetitive sequences at the ends of chromosomes, have been elongated tremendously, and this has potentially very large impacts. Effectively, these animals have a capacity to repair their tissues so that if you poison them, but you don't outright kill them, they actually have an extremely good capacity to fix themselves, whereas we have a limited capacity, so they're bad models.
Yep. Bret says that because lab mice have longer telomeres than wild mice, all the drug testing on them is invalid, and all the drugs in the world are potentially dangerous. There is so much stupidity to unpack here. First, and the most glaringly obvious problem with this logic, is that all drugs go through clinical trials on human subjects before going to market. So it's mice first, then other non-rodent animal species, then humans, prior to going to market, always. This fact alone renders this entire idea irrelevant and idiotic. We know what drugs do to people before people can buy them. So even if lab mice were somehow more resistant to some toxicity, we would catch it in other test subjects. Second, telomere length is just barely even relevant to what Bret is talking about. He's talking about toxicity and tissue repair. All telomeres do is prolong the duration of time that cell division can occur prior to the onset of senescence. They aren't some magic shield from every kind of deleterious biological process. Telomere shortening isn't even the only cause of senescence. Telomere length also does not correlate linearly with lifespan. Mice have longer telomeres than humans do, and we live way longer than them. And lab mice don't have uniquely long telomeres in the first place. Other species have longer ones. But most importantly, as any biologist knows, tissue degradation occurs via so many different mechanisms, given that there are so many types of tissues, from neural tissue to muscular tissue and so forth, all of this having indeed very little to do with telomeres. Telomere length does not have any impact on gene expression, its products, or its regulation, nor how toxic agents interact with the products of gene expression. A toxin that inhibits enzymatic function is not magically neutralized by telomeres. Telomeres are relevant to studies on aging and also